Greetings one and all. I'm here again with Patrick Dixon, and we're going to do another Rudolf Steiner's spiritual science, and today we're going to talk about Anthroposophia. Bit of a mouthful to say that, but this is a very important part of Anthroposophy. So welcome Patrick, and I wondered if you could start by telling us, who is Anthroposophia?
Well, it's sort of in the word, really. I mean, anthro, human, sophia, wisdom, which in a way you could say is the balance of the masculine and cosmic feminine, Sophia being the cosmic feminine and anthro being the cosmic masculine. And together they produce this wisdom. And then we have to ask ourselves, what is wisdom? And then you go back to the stages, the planetary stages, and the one that came before the Earth was the old moon, the purpose of which was to lay down all the wisdom, the substructure, the infrastructure, and the superstructure of what was to become Earth. So you could say the old moon was the planet of wisdom, and then it created the Earth, which was the house of wisdom, in which the human being would incarnate and develop the planet of love, which would be the next one, which would be Jupiter. So the task of the Earth, just as the task of the old moon was wisdom, the task of the Earth is love, which will come out in its full manifestation on Jupiter. Of course, to mainstream science, this is nonsense, but one has to distinguish between the concepts of, say, the solar system in orthodox science, which is that you've got these bodies spatially out, physical bodies, spaced out in what we call outer space. But one has to remind oneself that nobody has ever actually seen the planets in the way we see them constantly photographed, and this is from machines, and no one will step on them and walk upon them as we walk upon the Earth or breathe upon the Earth. It won't happen. If we ever managed to get to them, we'd have to be encased in something which completely cut us off at the same time. So we've taken for granted in the materialistic world conception these are the real things, but they're pictures that are actually imposed upon us. They're kind of an indoctrination in a way. So the anthroposophical view is actually the planetary manifestations are transformations of one world going through stages like a butterfly, from the pupa, the larvae, the pupa, the imago, those stages. It's not to say that there aren't things in this outer space, but it's going to change. And one of the things about it is that it's going to be transmuted by the inner development of the human being. This is the big difference. The mainstream science gives absolutely no agency to the world out. It's all a big externalized thing in which we hurl our intellectual things into, rather than something that is waiting to be transformed by the developing human being. And this developing human being will work not only in the body, but more and more also more consciously out of the body, in the between stages between what we call birth and death and rebirth. That work will become more and more conscious, and the communal work between those on the Earth and those in the higher dimensions will get more and more structured. And that is you could say the wisdom, the great wisdom which made us is one thing. Then the great wisdom we will make out of our response to the wisdom into which we are born. That's the next thing. You could say that's more the true Anthroposophia, the wisdom that we have as human beings have actually transmuted in our... We couldn't do that to begin with. To begin with, we were just being formed by cosmic wisdom. We had to get separated and develop our internal life. And that internal life is destined, you could say, to be externalized. But it's only when it's so highly developed that it doesn't lose its intrinsic soul spirit nature. And that soul spirit nature will envelop all reality and bring about transmutation.
Because in the ancient wisdom, Sophia is the name of wisdom.
Yeah.
But is this a carrying on from that meaning of Sophia from like the Greek times?
Yes, I mean, in a way, Athene, the goddess Athene, is in a sense the wisdom. It's also that thing which the oracles of Delphi, the Sibyls, express, which was the wisdom of the earth, the mother, really, the Mother Earth, is the part which all phenomena from the Father needs to come into manifestation. That is the meaning. And Sophia, in the future, the Sophia is also going as the mother of new faculties in the human being. All these new etheric capacities are possible through the birth, being brought to birth within the human being. So it's another form, and that is the mother that is ahead of us rather than the mother that is behind us, So, and that's what the Sophia, which is what she works in tandem with the Archangel Michael, in the sense that is the masculine face of the Christ force, the one who binds the dragon and brings in cosmic intelligence. The Sophia is the one who then brings to birth new faculties in the human being.
Do you think Mother Mary was carrying the Sophia stream?
Yeah, absolutely. That's of course we have the complexity of the two lines of descent, but the Mary force in that sense is, yes, the transmutation of that is the next great task. That's the assumption of the Virgin, the raising up of her capacities, to bring to birth. Yeah.
Can we talk a bit about what Rudolf Steiner's idea of Anthroposophia was about?
Well, I mean, you could say what Steiner was doing, he was linking together, he was creating or making us aware of the connective tissue between the culture ages, which we could say in the modern sense, all the religions of the world, which are kind of separated out in a sense, are linked by a hidden stream, a hidden tissue of mystery schools. That's really what it is. The same force. This is the great error in modern consciousness, is this idea that it is separated religions and that, suddenly as Christ comes. But actually this being is called Christ, was in preparation from before the creation of the earth, the purpose. And as this being descended, the light from this being lit up in certain parts of the earth, a localized, limited perception of this unlimited being who had a vast trajectory and purpose, which we're only beginning to realize now. And Anthroposophy is the beginning of the realization of the great trajectory which passed through all the great religions. I always say this metaphor is, you could say the roots were like the Vedas, the ancient Indian, then you've got the shoots and the leaves like Buddhism, and then you go out further in the shoots, you've got the Judaic stream, then you've got the fruit, the flower, the seed. That is the manifestation of the immortal in the plant. When you get to the seed, you've gone full cycle, you've produced the immortal. As you said about the acorn has an infinite forest. It is infinite, in a way, and that's really what the whole process was about. I mean, just as I say, in a drama, you might rehearse for weeks and weeks and weeks, and you do one performance, it's over in an hour. But the effect also goes out in the opposite corresponding weeks and weeks effect. So it's the same with this. For 3 1/3 years, something would taken eons to bring about will have an effect eons into the future. So
I'll just quickly add that when I was talking about the acorn, when we were discussing this the other day, I was saying about how from a oak tree, hundreds, thousands of acorns fall, but how many of them actually turn into oak trees? And we were talking about this as an analogy for our own development, like we're all acorns with the kernels, and that kernel is empty and we fill it with the divine. Maybe you would like to speak a bit more on that.
Yeah, well, of course. I mean, that's the history of the world. We have, it's like, almost put it in an Aramaic image, like a factory. You get one part, another part is added. It's not, the vehicle doesn't work yet. I mean, the real analogy is you've got the great father forces give us the structure, say, of the car, all the parts, components. The sun is what is in the fluid bodies that move through. The movement, the internal movement, the electricity, the spark plugs, the oil, the fuel tanks, the water, everything is, but the Holy Spirit is what brings it all together. It links the parts with the internal movements, which then creates the external movements, so, and this is where every part of our being, I mean, the first, you could say, the spirits of form, very high beings, gave us the ego, but it was still like an empty, it was a potential, could go many different ways. It's a vessel that could be filled with different forces by different beings. And the whole idea of the incarnation of Christ was to say this is the appropriate one. To fill your being with this will then lift up all other entities and the future. Whereas if you don't, or you shut off that being, then other beings come up from underneath. If you close the lid, something comes from it, and that will possess you, and that will be filled with a purpose that is antithetical to the greater plan, the divine human, which is the plan, the ultimate plan.
Well, doing this anthroposophy through the Rudolf Steiner training, it's saying that we allow Anthroposophia to walk with us. So is she coming into us, or is she aiding us in any way?
Well, yeah, you could say this is also connected to this idea that all the ancient pantheons of gods, whether it's the Norse myths, the Greek myths, the Indian, the Hebrew, all these, through the mystery of Golgotha, potentially have bowed down and put themselves within as a resource in the human being. And it's only through acknowledging the true Christ consciousness that these can come up and also be resurrected in a new way. It's like saying all the ancient cultures will recapitulate, but now filled with the divine, the Christ consciousness, the Michaelic. That's what will be added. Whereas if you don't allow that being in, then they will come up outside, but they will then be possessed by demonic forces. They will become sort of, in the worst sense, a pagan distraction, But that's, I mean, and Jung points to that. I mean, I always say that Jung is a kind of bridge between Freud and Steiner. Jung talks about the archetypes, the animus, anime, the internal soul resources that we must mine and out of it bring forth new qualities. And that's the Christ consciousness can do that, which is also connected partly with the descent into hell, to redeem, bring out and put into service even those forces that opposed us.
Well, you brought up about the pagans in that little bit, and I've had people say to me that Anthroposophia is an egregore that Rudolf Steiner's created. From my own readings of him, I believe he says she's been around for a long time, but has been attracted to the Anthroposophical Society. Maybe you could tell us more about that.
Well, yeah, I mean, in a sense, it is a sort of the awakening of the eternal feminine, which is combined with this capacity to think. It is bringing this feeling into the mind and thinking into the heart, which is really what it's all about, this uniting of these two often separated principles. And that's what, I mean, it is an ancient power, but it's needed preparation. I mean, in a sense, the transformation of Mary, that is a whole that's connected with this. The cosmic Mary becomes active in the Sophia, which is more than wisdom. It goes beyond wisdom. It is it's the fruits of the tree of wisdom.
And one of the things we were talking before we started recording, how some people think of Anthroposophy in a kind of like a cultic status.
Yeah.
But it's not a cult, obviously. But maybe you could speak on that a little bit.
Yeah, it turns out you define a cult. I mean, we have generally a very negative sense of cult, because there are many aberrated cults. There is, I've said before many times, that the Ahrimanic forces, these are the ones behind world materialism, which in some sense is the biggest cult of all. But that is a desert force. It's a vampire force, and it drains the world of real meaning. And people get a false sense of meaning through, getting all hung up on technology and things. And we're going to get down to space. We're going to find out, that the only way we're going to find it, the only way out is in. The only way beyond where we are. And so because of this terrible thirst and hunger that Ahriman has created, people fall for all kinds of escapes. They're false oases, really. They're in the desert and they go, oh, there's a mirage. No, let's drink that. It's not either not there or it's poisoned. And that's what most cults are. And they're very narrow. I mean, they have one thing and they stick to it. It's very limited. And that's how you partly, and also you have to measure the so-called positive or negative aspects of a cult by what do they actually do in the world. I mean, you look at anthroposophy, and I have lots of arguments with it in a way. I'm not a typical anthroposophist, but you look at it purely objectively. They have schools, they have hospitals, they do new kinds of farming. They're very aware of the damage to the earth and putting it right. And if you connect with the Steiner school, and I've known quite a lot of people who come out of them, they're pretty amazing. They're very balanced. Most of the young people who come out of the Steiner schools, and the whole method is, balanced far more than the orthodox. And the medicine is far more holistic. And the medicine, all the doctors are fully trained in orthodox medicine, but they go beyond it. It's not as if they're aberrating into some quackery. They actually go beyond it. And so therefore, if you say, if anthroposophy is a cult, then, well, it's a bloody good one. I mean, it's, you know what I mean? It's very easy. People get full of fear, or I think partly they don't want to commit to it. It is a commitment. And it does, in some senses, put you into a sort of, won't be forever, but a kind of separation, a slight isolation to mainstream culture. I know that as an artist, a writer and things, some ideas, it's changing a bit. The other gate, but has been, anything spiritual has not really been able to get through in the mainstream, whether you talk about theatre or TV. In the real sense, it may change, but the gatekeepers are themselves permeated by a certain Ahrimanic force, so.
No, I agree with you on that, because certain films that have a spiritual premise to them, I'm just going to think of the film with David Niven about reincarnation.
Oh, yes.
That's very rarely on TV, and when it is, it's on some obscure time in the night or afternoon. They don't want to.
That was about
promote.
The pilot, wasn't it?
That's right. Yeah,
very,
just as an example, and others are like that as well. They just don't put them on.
Yeah. I mean, there are exceptions come through, like that Wim Wenders one, about the angels. I can't remember what it's called. They came into this. They would sit in a tube train and talk to people. It showed that there are other things going on. There are people who do. People take risks, like Stanley Kubrick, with his eyes wide shut. He's looking at some dark forces. But they are, generally speaking, and I write a lot of stories, but in the sense I try to put the essential spiritual reality within them. People say, well, what's that mean? It's like there is a sort of, even in people you think are very, they're good soul development, but they're spiritually kind of completely truncated. One example I give is, maybe we might have to take his name off. But,
don't say his name then. But just say.
But he's a writer and he does a lot of children's stuff, but he's a sort of complete materialist atheist, and I just think, how can you reconcile those things? Even his daughter says he's a nihilistic optimist or something. I don't know.
But he writes uplifting stories. But then we're lucky we had the Inklings, and
they were very special. I mean, they really fearlessly took hold of those realities. Whereas you had those people on the thresholds who they weren't openly materialists, but they showed the results of the darkness. People like Kafka, even Orwell, to a certain extent. They didn't break through, but they were facing the dark force, so. And that whole culture is in that condition, in a way. But hopefully it is changing.
And of course, Owen Barfield was one of the Inklings. Did you ever get to meet him?
I never met him, but somebody actually asked me to do it. I met his son, who asked me to give a talk about him, but I haven't heard from him since. But yeah, he was a very, very spiritualized thinker. He really was. He was the true thinker of the Inklings, really. He wasn't so much the artist, but impressive.
And of course, quite very revered in the anthroposophical
world.
Oh,
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Totally, yeah. I mean, I think most of the Inklings were in different ways.
I would like to ask you, from the anthroposophical point of view, about Anthroposophia. Is she up against adversaries like we have for ourselves of, we have the Christ against the adversaries of Lucifer and Ahriman? What about Anthroposophia? Is she safe?
Well, you could say partly. Even in the book of Revelation, there is some indication in that the woman who has the child has to go into the desert to hide the child from them. That is a part of it. And in some sense, Anthroposophia has been kept to a degree hidden. It's not in the public domain. And so it's incompletely, and that means that it hasn't met up with these destructive critical forces, which it has to actually begin to face that. That's when, it has to stand up to the forces of darkness and bring light and reason, and a new kind of reason, which is actually in the Revelation, the Apocalypse. All these things, chapter 11, is very symbolic in that, in these beings which are pillars of wisdom and a pillar of strength, which we just read about in the lecture. They represent that all that is best that is developed in all these cultures, and they then carry the Christ in them, and what they do is they speak out, and then they confront, in a sense, its truth to power, the beings who are ruling the world. And they say to them, okay, fine, you've done interesting stuff, you do this, you do that, but can you confess yourself to Christ? Can you step down from that position? And that's when they can't. And then what these beings say, they just turn to the world and they say, little children, this is Antichrist. And this will probably happen. This is very prescient at this time. And that's when, because in their testimony, what they have to do is to show the illogical inconsistencies in the paradigm of materialism. The contradictions, the denials, all those things, the paradigm is massively reinforced by, paradoxically, technology and things. It's all got through that. It's not through the human experience at all. What Steiner would say is that the greatest instrument of knowledge and development of the world is what is within the human being. That's what the Christ is in the human being, is the moving point of evolution. That's it. That's where the great authority and the great progress is. And all the other stuff is secondary. If one follows the primary force, then you can redeem all the secondary. If you don't, then everything falls apart. But that's a very difficult thing to say, because the world is now being led in all sorts of ways to believe certain things. I always think about this outer space thing. Children being fed these ideas, and we're going to be spacemen, and it's ridiculous, because the speed and slowness of it, and even their own thoughts about the universe. Stars are so far away, you're never going to get there. Neither are your great grandchildren. So why are you getting excited?
I remember as a kid reading books about how we'd be living on Mars by 2020.
Yeah, it's all So who wants to live on Mars anyway? The whole thing is just, it's inconsistent. They're feeding a kind of fantasy, and and yet really the real mystery, the real wonder, the real journey is the inner journey, which goes out into the universe and changes the universe into the image of the divine through us. That's the gradual transformation of the earth, which we're all involved in. That is a far, far greater thing. I watched a rather rubbishy film the other night called Hard Sun. And I couldn't bear to watch it, because it was actually sort of based on a complete false understanding of the sun and everything. The sun is going to expand and burn the earth, all that stuff. And you just know that their fantasies are all wrong anyway. And the whole thing is just, whereas the real truth, that the sun and the earth are going to unite because of the development of human, is a far more profound and extraordinary. The truth is infinitely more extraordinary than any sort of blockbuster thing has ever put forward. But it's all around us. We're in this miracle all the time, in a way.
Because one day the Earth will become a sun.
Yeah, well,
Everything's
yes.
evolving.
I mean,
the moon will become a planet.
yeah. I mean, the thing is, the trajectory normally put over, and there are many levels in which it has to go through, and many ways of understanding it. And when we get to those different stages, we'll see it differently even from there. That the first is the sun reunites with the Earth, the moon reunites with the Earth. They transmute the Earth becomes a star. Then the star itself divides and becomes a zodiac. Out of which many groups of human beings who now are very karmically connected work together across divine space to bring about new creation. That's a very distant.
I think that's just so beautiful, though, that we, if we're worthy, will be part of that.
Oh yeah, absolutely. That's what's happening in the stars now. I mean, there are communities of beings who are working and have worked, and what happens is human beings get promoted to different levels of initiation where they can more work with those for a while. They have to come down. They haven't completely got there yet when the whole Earth becomes a zodiac. I mean, these are thoughts, seeds of thoughts and ideas that will be developed immensely in the future. When you imagine civilizations in the sixth epoch, which will be prepared in the sixth culture age, human beings will have like 1,000-year perspectives on governments. They will know, and people, you'll be able to sense who's coming in and what's going out and what effect is that having. Things that are completely outside present consciousness will come.
And when you say who's coming in, you mean who's incarnating onto Earth?
Yeah, exactly, yeah. I mean, you'll be able to help them, you see. You'll be able to enhance their entrance, because that's where even things like maternity experiences have become quite different, much more understanding of how to bring in and maintain consciousness and understanding the effect on the Earth as a being comes near. Certain effects will be perceived on the Earth in the subtle etheric forces of the Earth and the elemental beings. And we will work in totally different ways. On the other side, working with elementals, we'll understand that. And we'll actually work in all kinds of ways to reconnect them with the divine purpose. Because through Ahriman and our Ahrimanic consciousness that we've surrendered to, we're actually trapping the elementals. And that's what, then they rebel. That's when you get these massive disasters, kind of.
So instead of them being caught up in the technology or the driving airplanes or whatever it is they're doing, they should be working with helping us to develop the Earth.
Yeah, definitely. That's very important. I mean, there will be different forms of technology, but quite different from the ones we have now. I mean, the purpose, and one of the things about this, if you go to chapter 11, the two witnesses, what they will experience is a sort of parallel to what Christ experienced in the descent into hell. What will happen to them when they die is that they will go through a massive trajectory through all the technology. They will go inside it, through it, like a sort of structured surface hell. And the reason for that is, and then they will be resurrected. And because of that, whenever people use technological devices, wherever they are, if they go deep enough, they will see the divine in them. That's a completely different thing, because Ahriman doesn't want that. He wants to make it, seal it off from anything that can perceive it. But the divine trajectory will still be seen in those technological, and that will also bring about the possibility to create a technology, which I call technosophy, which will be totally enhancing of the purpose of the gods. What those two beings do is they reconnect us. They reconnect what we developed in outer science to the divine. That's their task. It's a Michaelic task on the Earth,
So I might be saying this in a very simple terms. Really, we need technology that is helping this planet develop for when it becomes the sun and the star later on in the future, rather than technology that just
technology wants to escape. Because it only sees this planet as a death star, really, which you've got to get away from. And that's the whole idea of sort of seeking out external planets. But and then, of course, Steiner says we'll mine the whole Earth and the mineral structures. That's valid, that the mineral structures of the Earth, the mineral forces will be transmuted by humanity. But then we go into a different condition. We go into the plant condition of life. But we will go through several conditions where we leave the physical Earth. and then we come back down into it, but it'll be a different kind of physical Earth. It will be, that physicality will be more advanced than this one. You know, there are many levels. I mean, Anthroposophia talk about this future Jupiter, which is a planetary condition of consciousness, which is we're now the Earth, and that is over 1 million years from now. You know, so but we go through many stages before that, and we reincarnate within these. There are reincarnation cycles. You know, mostly it is every 2,160 years. There are 2 incarnations. You know, per person. But it doesn't necessarily. It's not rigid in the sense that you might incarnate almost consecutively, but then you might have a longer. So it's all, you know.
Well, because Steiner said a lot of those that died in World War I came back within 100 years, didn't they?
Yeah, because they hadn't completed all their tasks. You know, there was forces want to see. Those are the forces that really want to confuse these great archetypal rhythms, which is also what the being we call Satan is doing in relationship to the whole solar system. He's trying to deregulate it from the cosmos, whereas then the Ahrimanic beings are doing it on the Earth. You know, they're doing this breaking up of the perceiving the greater pattern. But this will only serve to enrich it in the end. If we can take hold of it, it will help us develop our individuality and our strength that we have to deal, because we will have to deal with these forces just as higher beings have had to do it. You know. So.
I remember now someone was asking me, where are these Ahrimanic beings? And I was not sure whether to say, are they in the astral realm? Are they in us? Are they on this material plane but invisible?
Yeah.
Maybe you could explain that a little bit.
I think there are many levels. I mean, just like Lucifer has many manifestations. And one of the things you could say, in all matter, Ahrimanic beings can live. And where you see structures of matter which are not alive, slight difference between a piece of wood and a tree, you can sense there are Ahrimanic forces, elementals in there. They are so laws of gravity. Everything that's dead has forces streaming down. Everything that's alive has forces streaming up. You know, so, and that's also, I mean, characterizing Ahrimanic is seen really in the principle of solidification. Yeah, many characteristics of the Ahrimanic forces. I mean, we could say one is cold, contraction, where even the solidification of the earth has something of the Ahrimanic within it, so almost a necessary. They were necessary. Steiner speaks about the birth and death processes, which are both, in a sense, forms of contraction. When you're born, you have to contract. You're separated from the watery womb, and then you go through the birth canal. It's a very dangerous experience, and you come out, and then you're in a body. All these things have all the things from the cosmos which have formed you and contracted down into your body and formed these separated entity. You could say this separation is also tinged with the Ahrimanic, whereas is also a part of the great cosmic wisdom that's brought it about. But the Ahrimanic beings have been brought into service. You know, you can say, yes, we are the higher gods say we are the rulers of the final purposes, and we will constantly be renewing them. You have the task to solidify and give definition to aspects of our work as it's in process. I mean, this idea of literally forming objects which have their own center of gravity is a form of Ahrimanic aspects, because in the fluid element, if you take the fish, for instance, they feel the fluids of the whole earth. They haven't separated themselves from it, really, in the way that the animals that come on the land have. They have separated themselves, and that means there's less of a group consciousness, there's less of a all in one. And this separation is also to do with the Luciferic beings, which produces competition. That's mine, no, that's yours. You know, this is this whole division, which is necessary, but it's the two-edged sword. With the Christ, it is turned into a greater sense of community and a deep love for all the other separations, and that brings about a unity. It's greater than just a unity. It's a union of conscious individuals. I always say image of the orchestra is great, because each individual learns their instrument, and the more perfect they are at their instrument, the more they can contribute to the whole orchestra, and not only not lose themselves, but find themselves more in making that contribution. And that transmutes the Ahrimanic separation. First, the separate instrument, this difficult thing, and then gradually through the music it starts to unite. It becomes, you could say, music is the transfigured body of the instruments. Yeah.
Which is what, by doing this Anthroposophia, we're becoming a community to work together, because Steiner, I see from his last few years on this planet, he was a little bit concerned that people weren't doing the Anthroposophia.
Yeah.
And he said that, I think it was in 1916 to Rittelmeyer, that in 100 years there'd be another impulse to try this. So I feel like that's why a lot of people are being drawn to Anthroposophia today, because we've got that impulse again. I don't know if that's Anthroposophia or Rudolf Steiner and the other anthroposophists that did understand it, pushing us from the other realms. But
Well, I think it's everything. I mean, I think those, of course, there are many souls since the beginning of the Anthroposophical Society are now in the superphysical worlds, and one has to be aware of them. And they are become more and more conscious. I mean, one of the interesting things is when you remember somebody from the earth, that memory turns into love in the spiritual world. It becomes love. That's what it is. So we're remembering is an act of love, and that then you can begin to communicate. And and also there's this whole idea that many great Platonist souls have come at this time. Whereas at the beginning of the Anthroposophical Society, it was mostly Aristotelians. This idea of the early anthroposophists, the first ones, were more Aristotelian. And what does that mean? Of course, it's generally accepted that Steiner himself was a reincarnation of Aristotle, or at first Aquinas, probably had a female incarnation as well, and became Rudolf Steiner. And Aristotle, what was Aristotle? Aristotle was really the being who brought thought down to the earthly plane. Or rather, he applied it, whereas Plato was the one who was open to receiving it. He hands it to Aristotle, and Aristotle applies it to the earth, and therefore you get the four elements. And this was also the whole great Greek impulse of finding oneself on the earth and discovering, on the one hand, the great beauty, the art of Greece, this sense of the physical beauty, the beauty of nature, and that was the tragedy, which also brought the concept of tragedy into Greek culture, is that we have this immense, but all we do is we get old and die and go into Hades, into the land of the shades. There was no up motion of that. There was a tremendous appreciation of the physical body and nature. And that was the sort of artistic, and then there was the scientific beginnings in Aristotle and other people, the geometries, like Euclid, Eratosthenes, who measured the earth, Pythagoras, mystery of number, and then Archimedes, the mechanical forces. All these, there's a tremendous earth, but it was the tragedy was that the resurrection hadn't happened yet. And that's really also what Solomon said, with all the wisdom that came through from the previous cultures, the Judaism, and all the rest of it. Marvelous temple. All is vanity, he said. All is vanity. Which in a sense is true. They all would have, without the resurrection, it would have been that. Whereas the prophets, like Elijah, even though it was before, he could see the light of the resurrection, even before it happened. So... But then we go back to the Aristotelians. So the Aristotelians in the Anthroposophical Society, generally speaking, are very good at organizing things. They're to a certain extent, the negative side, they're the bureaucrats of the Anthroposophical Society. They have a certain... They can be infected by Ahrimanic forces much more easily than Platonists. But they also people who can produce very interesting studies. They can go into the scientific world, and they can extract and bring out Michaelic principles. So there are one or two writers who definitely do that. They're less aware of the great artistic manifestations. Steiner himself, I think, was in the stream of the great thinkers. He wasn't in the stream of the great artists, but he could give indications for art, and he recognized that, what it was. Whereas if we have Platonism now, you'd get the opposite. You get beings who would give a great indication about science, not being scientists, but they give great indication, partly because they stand outside it, but also could be really artists. They can, because art now is what we have to bring as an authority to question the one-sided authority that modern science has been given about the world. And art will make portals through which true inspirations can come.
And Steiner said that was how anthroposophy will be shown in the future, was through the arts and through music and such like.
Absolutely, because in a way the universe is a work of art. The creator is emphasizing that the creator, this, the wisdom, the music, the harmonies, the proportions, the balances on the earth. I mean, I'm giving one of my Catholic conversations I just call "Wow, Wonders of the World," and it's looking at those extraordinary sort of things on the earth itself, of rhythms and balances, throughout the world, whether it's migration, streams of birds and fish and ocean currents, and all this weaving and moving together, so, and then to put that in art and then to connect it to higher spiritual purposes is the Platonic thing in a way, and also to relate more to the social sphere. The Anthroposophia has had and still has got a strong Essenic quality, in the sense that it's still enclosed. That's the reason it hasn't yet gone into the world. In a sense, it hasn't been attacked because it hasn't really put its head above the parapet, which it's got to do soon.
Would you think the Waldorf schools are being attacked though? So maybe things
I think they are.
To change?
Yes, I think they're being. I don't think that people are attacking fully conscious why, but there are definitely forces that don't really want them around. They're not encouraged. They are more in Germany, and places like that, and the hospitals as well. But it's the thoughts. They're afraid. There are certain beings who are afraid of the kind of education, and the counter images. Kids with computers at very early ages. The whole way is taught. And the paradigm, the ideas that are put across as being the sort of the ultimate reality, like Darwin's theory of evolution. All these theories are put over as a sort of the final. This is, which has to be questioned. It's difficult to question.
Yeah, because it's in the title, the theory.
Yeah.
Darwin was doing it. He wanted to prove God, didn't he? And I think he still was trying to prove there was a God. It's just what other people have used his book for afterwards.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a question, and also even Einstein. There are limits, you see, to the way they thought. They have become icons in the wrong way. They should be valued. I mean, now, of course, they've probably changed their whole view. They've gone through stages, and even people who question it on the earth now, it's them questioning, putting the question into you and saying, look at this again. Because it's important to try to understand how the ideas arise, the trajectory which brings it out, but then to say, that's just an image of the present state of human consciousness. It's not an ultimate reality at all. And Ahriman is behind. In one way, you could say the Ahrimanic world conception is the world of the Father without the Son, which is like saying you've got this huge machine. All the parts are there, but it doesn't really move. You can't move it. It's completely immovable. Whereas once you get the fuel in, all the fluids, then you can move it, and that's the Holy Spirit when the whole thing moves. And the Father without the Son gives you a huge quantitative picture, which can't be experienced by the human being. It's only can be downloaded as a computer calculation. Then it's what I call, and it's from the Book of Revelation, the abomination of desolation, because it desolates the universe. It takes away any kind of relationship of what is within to anything that's out there. There's just a big anonymous set of forces, which we're never going to reach. We think we are. We're deluding ourselves, Whereas actually, we all travel through the cosmos, and our influence is going to be there.
Well, that's one of the things of doing anthroposophy, isn't it? Is to show us our delusions, and how to be or put you onto the track to do the work of being the human being you should be.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah.
And just the other day when we were here doing the Book of Revelation, I was actually sat on the other chair, wasn't I? But we kept looking at the Steiner lectures that are up there called The Wonders of the World. I'm thinking I need to look at that book, and then you brought it up. And your first Kathy conversation is when?
12th of April.
And that's going to be on the Wonders of the World, the wow.
Yeah.
So if you want to come and be wowed, come to Rudolf Steiner House. And also Patrick and I are doing in June an afternoon on the 8th sphere from the Rudolf Steiner point of view, because I think there's been quite a few people going down some strange rabbit holes about the 8th sphere. So we thought we'd do an afternoon of discussing it and hopefully bring some conversation up about that. Is there anything you want to add to all this as we continue?
Well, you could say something about the 8th sphere, yes. I mean, I'm looking at the book, The Temple Legends. The Temple Legend.
Well, that's all about the brotherhoods and things,
yes,
isn't it?
Well, that goes right back. That goes originally into the Old Testament and before, because the temple is really the human body, the divine body, and it's been taken over. This is the great mythological struggle for the body of Moses by the adversary forces and the forces of light. Moses being the pillar of wisdom, they want to take it, So the Temple Legend is, an amazing story. It's also about Solomon, who is also an embodiment of the pillar of wisdom in a sense, and he goes through these huge trajectory of emotions, a huge spectrum of emotions. My view is that, I've said it before, Solomon reappeared in form partially as sheaths in the being of Shakespeare. And because Shakespeare's plays are a temple of words, and there's enormous wisdom in them, but there's also, what there is as well, is the trajectory of human emotions through the full spectrum, from the highest to the lowest, the darkest, the lightest, and that's because, I view, is that Solomon himself did that. He was he was given this incredible knowledge and wisdom because he was tested. What would you rather have, all the riches in the world or this wisdom? And he said, I'll have the wisdom. And because he said that, he got all the other stuff as well. But then he fell. He went through a fall. He rose again, but he went through this fall because of the Queen of Sheba. I'm blaming her. She came to him. She heard about him, sat at his feet, and thought, wow, this is amazing. She was totally knocked out by it. And he thought, oh, this is good. I like her. and she said, oh, who actually built it? I know you thought about it and had this. And he said, oh, well, no, don't worry about that. Then it's not important. But you knew that it was important. He didn't want, he sensed something. He didn't want her to meet Hiram, who was the Cain stream, who was the builder, who had all the knowledge to actually physically embody it. And of course she met him and she fell head over heels for him, really, because he was the ultimate macho type, really.
And that's Hiram Abiff.
Yeah, the
temple builder who laid the foundations.
Yeah, he was, he was the fire and earth, whereas Solomon was the air and water, and she, female, responded to that. If Solomon had been even wiser than he normally was, he would have stepped back and said, fine, it's all right, but that's not easy to do. And his astral body was drawn down into a murder plot, which he would have regretted after death. But and then of course my view is that what appears in Shakespeare is a lot of that, and also the sonnets and the strange dark lady who all the people say, oh, it's probably a gay lover. I think it's the Queen of Sheba. It's a kind of deep incarnational memory of the Queen of Sheba, was from Ethiopia, the whole. So, these things cross over. Many of the great figures in the world of art and things like that have been in the Old Testament in certain forms and sheaths, so.
Because maybe you could say, because some people might think you mean, because you was clear about it, but Shakespeare is a reincarnation of Solomon. He's not. He's got a sheath of
Yeah,
Solomon within him.
I would say that.
So these sheaths are like certain, we split up when
Yeah.
we die,
Well,
our soul,
I think
or...
the more advanced human being you can become, you can objectify a particular sheath. If you excarnate and you sense beings who are also in the spiritual world who have got a mission, and you cross over with them, and you think, oh wow, and you say, listen, take this. I've developed this. I can see you could use this, and then you can go. And then this really happens, and then they come down, and then they take further this impulse. Meanwhile, this one gets filled with something even more, because if you give away in sacrifice and gift to another, you gain more. So that's what I feel, and I think that's true of, I think it's Leonardo. There are many beings who this exchanging. It's only possible when the being gets to a certain level of advancement, because they can literally separate part of their being and say, take that.
Do you think maybe that anthroposophists who have passed over in since before we were born, then can put their sheaths into people that they see are potential candidates for being initiates of anthroposophy?
Oh yeah, I mean, of course, there's this idea of the walk-in. At a certain state of life, the being enters you and becomes a part of you and changes. Yeah, that does happen, and then more archetypally, that usually happens in the bodhisattva at a certain time of life. Suddenly, this entity will come into you, and you are, and that's a sign of a kind of initiation process. You make yourself open, and then you receive, something else. And of course, that was archetypally in the Christ. The Jesus of Nazareth had to be prepared for so. And this finally, this other thing, this crowning, walking came,
which was from when he was baptized by John, and the Holy Spirit came along as the dove, and came down into him.
And then after that comes the temptation in the wilderness. All those stages that being went through, from the actual birth, the two children, and then going to, and then finally the climax of the climax of coming to the earth is in the baptism, and then after that, those 3 1/3 years, which were teaching, and then that whole thing, and then the next great mystery was the actual mystery of Golgotha, from Gethsemane to the resurrection. So.
I was actually talking to someone the other day about 33 1/3, because when I was a teenager, I was in a very poor band, and we called ourselves 33 1/3, but we were thinking of the record, of them days.
Yeah.
But then 33 1/3 used to come up quite a lot for me in different things. And then it took me a while to realise that 33 1/3 times 3 is 100, which again is a very special number. So all this special geometry and numerology.
Oh yeah, that's all these great archetypal patterns and regularities which the Ahrimanic forces want to disrupt. I mean, even the after death, the normal thing is 3 1/3 days the etheric body needs to unravel. Then you go 1/3 of the length of your life in the astral world, and so there are all these questions, but there's massive variation in it as well. But if you measured out all your incarnations in this great set, then they will come to these regular forms. That famous statement, there is a divinity that shapes our ends, rough hew them as we will,
So we had the rough stone that we want to become the smooth stone. But you have just reminded me, so we're doing this a few days after Steiner's 100th year of his death. And I always found it odd that he was actually cremated. I would have thought he would have been buried so he could go back into the earth. And I just find that odd, because he talks about we need to go back into the earth. Surely our body needs to be in the earth, not our ashes out in the air, or wherever they are now, Steiner's
Of course,
ashes.
they would more or less go to the earth. I think what Steiner says, it doesn't really matter. And I think with him being like that, he could say it's irrelevant what happens, because anyway, I'm doing stuff with my body which normal human beings don't do. I think, this is an interesting thing, because on one level you could say you could prepare your body as a special homeopathic potentization for the earth itself, which is, of course, I think what the divine did. And this is a huge mystery which may take the rest of earth evolution to understand. I mean, the actual process went on in the resurrection. The body may have stayed in the tomb, and then the spirit, the astral ego, descended into hell. And as that was going on, the body itself was being dissolved, and it was maybe into a sort of mineral ash, which then just disappeared into the earth. And the physical body, above and beyond the material, reappears, and can only stay for a certain length of time on the earth, because it was too advanced for the earth. It couldn't, so it had to go into an ascension. But I mean, those mysteries are really the most mysterious of all, the resurrection body. I mean, I think, in the case of Enoch and Elijah, there's another, example of being taken up,
Yes.
or not leaving a corpse. That's one of a sign, a total transubstantiation of the body. Even some of the great yogis have got, had extraordinary experiences pretty close to that. But that is the most occult in some senses.
Yeah, I've been reading a lot about the yogis, or were they Tibetan lamas, who they prepared themselves for death, and within 7 days they kind of disintegrated. They shrunk.
Yeah.
They shrunk and shrunk their bodies as they were dying, and then there was a spark of a rainbow light that left them, so they'd created their rainbow bodies, which I found just fascinating
they did not
to
leave
read.
any material behind, or
I think they left a little, it's like they shrunk down like doll sizes as they were dying in this, and obviously they'd been taken many years to prepare for when that happened, but then when they were dying, it all would happen within 7 days apparently.
Yeah.
But I find that just also quite fascinating, of another way of developing yourself enough so that you can go forward, what I would assume, into some kind of astral realm.
Yeah, I mean, it's related to this future state also, where you don't leave a corpse, you just dematerialize. We're not at that stage yet, but matter is retarded, so things die and they leave around a corpse for a while. Like a stick that falls from a tree, it's no longer got life flowing through it, but the form stays. But you can get to a level where you become more and more internally verb, so that you leave no noun principle behind you. That's would be the next stage. And apparently in St. John, the evangelist, there's no body. Even Moses, there's no body. No, there's no, that's, and there are many stages it's conscious disintegration. I mean, I was saying to this Chinese lady I got to know, I said, one of the things is that one thing is that while our future life is disintegrating our present integration for the sake of a greater one. You know what I mean? And if we open ourselves, or our crown chakra, to this, we can feel our present forces leaving into a future design. That all those things are going to get more and more apparent.
I think we're very lucky that we want to do this kind of thing. I remember talking to Ari Torreson about this, I know that it can be dangerous to do this kind of work because the adversaries don't want this to happen, do they? But we want to be there to help the evolution of the earth and humanity, and we're willing to risk our lives for it. Not that we're all going to be out there fighting Araman and Lucifer or anything, but for me, it gave me a big meaning to life, even though I always knew there was a meaning to life, but I couldn't quite grasp it as a teenager and in my 20s. It's like, there's more to this, we should be doing something. And it wasn't until I really began to understand the various mystical paths that I'd looked into of, we're here to help with the evolution and our own evolution. And obviously from a humanity point of view, you were saying about how the planet will go to become going to the Jupiter stage next, so we will be a different kind of human then, and so forth and on and on and on, and at some point a long time away we'll become angels, hopefully, if we are worthy.
Well, I mean, of course, it's a great mystery, and it's going to change as it goes on, is that what is it that actually survives? What is it that, we talk about reincarnation, but what happens is we meet people. I mean, in sort of fundamentalist world, literally you meet and you settle back in your family and your dog and you have your cups of tea and it's all there. I mean, whereas actually, in a way, at this time, you go into the spiritual worlds and you go through all these processes, like the releasing of the ether body, and then they're going through the astral world for a third of your lifetime, and then you meet spiritual beings. And by the time, in a normal trajectory this time, it's almost like you're being born into the physical world, because when you're born, you don't quite know where you are. You gradually grow up. It's something you change. You grow up into this world, and as you grow up, memory of that one recedes. And when you're fully here, you've lost it altogether. You don't know what happened before birth. You don't know where you came from. What the heck am I? You know. And that, of course, that will change. And just by the same token, when you die, a lot of human beings, it's like going to sleep. You're in a dream. You can't even remember where you were exactly. You know, I mean, you may be sitting in a room, you may be talking, and then you die, and then suddenly your ether body is reaching all these pictures, and it's not as if you can think in the normal way. You can't say, "Oh, I see what this is. This is my ether body leaving me. Oh, I'm now moving it." I mean, as you get more advanced, then you will be able to do that. It's like lucid dreaming. But normally, and as you go through and the dream, you begin to know the laws of the spiritual world, just as you know the laws of the earth. And you are familiar with it, but you can't quite believe what it was before. But then you get a yearning to come back to something which draws you back down. And we go through all these processes. And then you say, well, what do I meet others? Yeah, you will. And in many cases, you'll meet them in the next life. And they will probably be in sync with your reincarnation cycles to a certain extent. But you may not say, oh, that person was this person. But what you do know is that you have an incredible affinity. You know, and there is that. And we don't even question it. I mean, if it was a completely alien experience and we came from nowhere, when children were born, there would be no feeling or recognition. You'd be in this, what is this? You know, it's because we know deep down, we do recognize it. We do know, you know, I'm here again. You know what I mean? It's a whole, but it's not yet become a clear thought in your brain, you know, so, and in the distant future, we will be able to say, oh, you were so-and-so, and so-and-so, and you're really, you know what I mean? That will happen. That clarity will happen. But it's not there generally yet. But that the real immortality is that everlasting life. You will be born again and you will be alive again. Even though you've forgotten that, you're alive before you're born in a way, and you're in it, then you go through an eclipse, and then but then, so it's understanding all those complex states, which the veil between them is getting thinner all the time.
Well, I would like to thank you very much, Patrick, and I would just like to remind everyone, so we've got our 8th Sphere on the 14th of June at Rudolf Steiner House, and your cafe conversations are going to be fortnightly starting April the 12th.
Yeah.
So thank you very much, Patrick. It's been entertaining as always.